morning. I'm Christy Wyatt, Associate Vice Chancellor for Communication and Engagement, and I would like to welcome you to our first ever remote convocation. Our theme this year is After This, Anything, and after this, we can do anything. We've all weathered some really difficult times during the spring and summer as we faced the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've also really created some successes for ourselves and our students as we help them to continue to complete their education, and many of them cross the stage. So we'll be celebrating all of that success, but we'll also be looking ahead to how we can continue into this new year to empower our diverse communities for success. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the agenda today. First, we're going to have a message from our board presented by Mr. Joe Alderete Jr. We'll also hear from our Chancellor. He always has encouraging words for us in setting the path forward for this academic year. And then we'll have a focus on really diversity, equity, and inclusion. And many of you have heard about the work that we're doing in that area, but we have a special keynote speaker, Dr. Sean Harper, who is with the University of Southern California and the founder of the USC Race and Equity Center. So he'll be able to share some insight with us on how we can move forward in that area as an organization and individually what we can do. And then we'll hear from Dr. Veronica Garcia, who will talk about our Employee Giving Back campaign. So be sure to listen up to that and see how you can contribute. And then we'll also have a video and an address from our Faculty Senate presidents. So after this session is over, I also want to remind you that there are breakout sessions, and I'll go over those at the end of this convening. I also want to remind you that after Dr. Harper's keynote speech, we'll have an opportunity to have a Q&A with him. Now, this is a very rare opportunity and something that you'll want to take part in, so please use the Q&A function to post any questions that you have, and we'll be moderating that at the conclusion of his keynote speech. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Joe Alderete Jr.
Good morning and welcome to our Alamo College's District Convocation. My name is Joe Alderete. I am the Vice Chair for the Alamo College's District Board of Trustees. We have some other members that are joining us this time around on our cyber meeting. Board Chair Marcelo Casillas, our newest board member Jose A. Macias, Board Secretary Ana Bustamante, Board Assistant Secretary Joe Jesse Sanchez, and Trustees Roberto Zarate, Jean Sprague, Yvonne Katz, Clint Kingsbury, and Student Trustee Darius Martin, and Trustee Alternate Morgan Varela. I would also like to thank our former Student Trustee Alejandra Gomez, who served with excellence. First of all, I want to sincerely thank our faculty, because I know during this pandemic it has been extremely difficult, but you all have been very versatile. You've been very resilient in trying to help our students succeed through their college education. They will never forget what each and every one of you faculty members has done for them and how you impacted their lives. This has been a very tough time for all of us, but you all have stepped up to the plate and have done an absolutely marvelous job. Along with that, our Chancellor Mike Flores, who has led our administration through the Vice Chancellors, the presidents, the staff, and the faculty, has done an amazing job in demonstrating his leadership skills and how to navigate through all of this pandemic that we've had. Everybody has stepped up to the plate. This pandemic was devastating for all of us, not only here in San Antonio and in our state, but in our nation and in our world. But the Alamo Colleges has shined during this time. And the amazing part is that you all have stepped up and you have taken an opportunity for improvement. And that is, you have taught yourselves, those of you that aren't so techy, and you've taught the students how to utilize the mediums that we have now, our laptops, our iPads, how to use the internet more effectively. How can we communicate in these times of pandemic? You have shown everybody in this city, all the grumblings that are going on with all the school districts and all over the state, all over the country, Alamo Colleges has been a leader. And I have told our Chancellor Mike Flores that we are leading the way in the entire country. This is a Baldrige moment. You have stepped up and you've done an outstanding job for our students. We've become Zoom experts, is the best way I can describe it. And y'all have managed to do that at this critical time, and guess what's coming up? We are moving into the Promise program. The Promise program is going to be extremely critical. We are actually increasing our student population. Why? Because of the caliber of instruction, the caliber of caring that we have here at the Alamo colleges. And I want to tell you, it's all of us. It's everybody from the person that cleans our restrooms to the person across that heads the Board of Trustees and all those members. That's what's the beauty of the Alamo Community Colleges. We all care at all our respective levels. The staff, the faculty, the vice presidents, the vice chancellors, the presidents. Everybody cares all the time. That is the most important factor that I have found, and I truly believe you're making the difference in this thing. When we've also, and this is also you, every one of you, we've added to our impressive list of awards our designation as Achieving the Dream Leader College. And I'm reading it because I want to tell you all the awards that we have won. We're only one of 2 community colleges in the nation to receive the Achieving the Dream Leah Meyer Austin Award. One of 2, folks, in the entire United States. This recognizes our excellence and quality of student advancement and student education. 3 of our colleges, Palo Alto, San Antonio College, and Northwest Vista, were named to the list of the top 150 colleges in the United States eligible for the 2021 Aspen for Community College Excellence Award. That's amazing. Again, we were there at the top. And San Antonio College was named one of the top 10 finalists. They made the top 1%. Northeast Lakeview College, also with St. Philip's, were honored with the awards for from the Quality Texas Foundation, the state organization that is modeled after the Ball Ridge Award. Awards after awards after awards. We're kicking off our 75th anniversary here at the Alamo Colleges. And those of you that have great tenure here at the Alamo Colleges can be very proud of everything we've managed to accomplish this time. We have done it. We have accomplished this change, even in spite of this pandemic that has brought several countries in this world down to their knees. But our staff, our faculty, our vice chancellors, our presidents, our administrators, and our leader, Mike Flores, have done an amazing job in keeping this on an even keel and moving forward. And you know who's going to reap the benefits? The one that deserves to reap the benefits, our students. So thank you for all you do. Thank you for every minute that you spend with our students. You will be shaping the future here at the Alamo College District. Thank you again in behalf of everybody, the board of directors, the administration, every single entity at the Alamo Colleges. Thank you.
I just want to thank each and every one of you. I think it's important what we've been able to do over the past 6 months, and also for us to be prepared, as Vice Chair Alderete mentioned, to support students this coming academic year. And indeed, it is a team effort. So if we look at the shared vision that our Board of Trustees have articulated of being best in the nation in student success and performance excellence, if we look at the leadership team, the district leadership team, which is composed of the chancellor, the vice chancellors, the presidents, stakeholder groups, faculty senate, staff senate, and student district council, all of us, about 50 of us working together. I'm thankful to the close to 100 individuals from throughout our Alamo College's district family who planned the migration for us to be able to train 2,000 faculty members initially during the spring, and then to be able to continue that training during the summer and also during the fall, so we can engage more faculty as part of that to support students in learning remotely. And I think most importantly, to be able to support our 65,000 students, which are as young as 14 and go all the way up to the age of 84. So each and every student coming to us for various reasons, some to earn a certificate, some to earn a degree, many to take courses, and so that they can achieve a goal that they've articulated to their faculty member and to their academic advisor. And in fact, our students wouldn't be able to cross the finish line if it wasn't for you. They wouldn't be able each and every day, each course, in spite of many challenges that they confront at home, supporting their children, supporting their parents, connecting with their families, being able to work on a daily basis, or perhaps even looking for employment. For them, as the essential workers in our community, to be able each and every day to have that focus and to be able to turn on the screen, to help their children connect to virtual instruction, to ensure that they're able to provide food, to be able to make ends meet, to pay all of those essential bills. And so I just want to thank all of you for what you've been able to do with courses to connect students. And if we look at what was done in the spring, we actually were able to increase the course completion rate from 91.1% to 91.8%. The other part is through a team effort, the Student Advocacy Center staff and others working with Student Financial Services to support 17,000 students in receiving federal CARES assistance. On average, about $300 to each financial aid recipient, and then students articulated additional needs were able to have most of those needs met, and then raise privately close to $500,000 through the foundation. So what we've done is what we've always done during our 75-year history, is we've been able to work together to collectively ensure that we can support each other as colleagues, faculty, and staff, to then back up each and every one of our students, because that's the most important thing. So a couple of things to highlight. One, of course, 95% of us are going to continue to connect in this way. The other is that we are getting ready for the start of classes. Each of you at your respective college, all 5 of our wonderful colleges with our college leadership teams, connecting this week so that we're ready to go on Monday. The other part is that we're fortunate to partner with the City of San Antonio and Bexar County, in which we will support an additional 5,000 individuals who were recently displaced. They're part of the 165,000 within our community who have been displaced through COVID economically. We'll be able to train 5,000 of them in a post-high school credential. For some, that could be as little as 4 weeks or 4 months, but for many, it could be a level 1, level 2 certificate, or even an associate's degree. And then City Council on Thursday is going to take to San Antonio voters a 1/8 sales tax proposition on November 3rd to allow support for up to 10,000 displaced workers annually for 4 years. So 40,000 individuals that can connect either through any one of the 5 Alamo colleges or our 2 public sister universities, right? UTSA or Texas A&M San Antonio. So what does that mean? That means that Alamo colleges, through our faculty members and our certified advisors, our enrollment coaches, our librarians, each and every individual together, all 5,000 of us, will support our 65,000 students. Support them in mastery of content, challenging them academically within the classroom virtually, being able to ensure that they're on path with their certified advisor, providing support outside of the classroom in our teaching and learning centers through our learning resource centers, or perhaps providing additional assistance through our Student Advocacy Center network at each one of our 5 colleges. And then we'll welcome an additional 5,000 individuals who are part of the 165,000 recently displaced and unemployed, and providing them with a post-high school credential. Why is that so very important? Because we know the path to the middle class for any of our students, most of our neighbors and some family and friends, is through a credential. And in fact, a credential from the 5 colleges can mean up to $10,000 more in their lifetime and $500,000, 10,000 more annually and $500,000 in their lifetime. And so that is a personal return on investment. That they're challenged academically, they're able to connect in the labs, they have an experience through an apprenticeship, service learning, or an internship, they earn a credential, and they're able to provide for themselves, their families. Most importantly, they're able to connect and pursue their passion. So thank each and every one of you. I want to thank our board for their shared vision. I want to thank each one of you as a colleague for what you've done on a daily basis to connect, to support, to engage, and to challenge. And I look forward to the start of this unique academic year for us, the 2021 academic year. Thank you all, each and every one. Muchísimas gracias.
And now Dr. Mordecai Brownlee will introduce our keynote speaker.
Good morning, Alamo Colleges. This morning, I'm privileged to introduce Dr. Sean Harper. Sean Harper is a provost professor in the Rozier School of Education and the Marshall School of Business at the University of Southern California. He is also the Clifford and Betty Allen Chair in Urban Leadership, founder and executive director of the USC Race and Equity Center, president of the American Educational Research Association, and a past president of the Association for the Study of Higher Education. Dr. Harper's research focuses primarily on race, gender, and other dimensions of equity in an array of organizational contexts, including K-12 schools, colleges and universities, and corporations. He has published over 100 peer-reviewed journal articles and other academic publications, Review of Research in Education, Teachers College Record, Harvard Educational Review, Journal of Higher Education, Journal of College Student Development, and Review of Higher Education are just some of the journals and research that he has published. Johns Hopkins University Press is publishing his 13th book, Race Matters in College. His research has been cited in more than 14,000 published studies and funded by more than 15 million in grants. Dr. Harper has presented his research at various White House and U.S. Department of Education convenings. He was appointed to President Barack Obama's My Brother's Keeper Advisory Council in 2015 and recognized in Education Week as one of the 10 most influential professors in the field of education in 2017. Alamo Colleges, let's welcome Dr. Sean Harper.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brownlee, for such a wonderful and generous introduction. Thank you, Chancellor Flores and Dr. Carmen Mercedes, for extending the invitation for me to be with you and your colleagues here in your first ever virtual convocation. It is a real privilege for me to spend this time with you from California early this Monday morning as you kick off your new school year. Let me also take a moment to congratulate you on your honors from Achieving the Dream. Our center, the USC Race and Equity Center here, has a wonderful partnership with Achieving the Dream. And I am just absolutely thrilled that they have rightly recognized Alamo Colleges in this way. We are just starting a new partnership with the Aspen Institute. So I'm also really happy to hear that you've been recognized by them as well. What a treat it is to be with such a highly accomplished district as confirmed by these awards and recognitions. So bravo to you. Let me also take a moment to shout out Tyler Elise on Twitter. I woke up this morning to a 5:36 a.m. tweet from @Tyler Elise expressing tremendous excitement for today's convocation speech. And that made me even more excited to be with you. So thank you so much, Tyler, for giving me even more inspiration for this day. Let me say that I am giving, at this point, I think a couple dozen back to school addresses for K-12 districts and convocation addresses for colleges and universities. The theme that you've chosen for yours is my absolute favorite. And I promise you that I don't say that to all the districts. I think you are exactly right. After this, anything is possible. Let me, from one faculty member to another, express my sincerest appreciation to all of the faculty who had to pivot very abruptly to remote learning this past spring. I had to do that in the middle of my spring semester, and I understand fully how challenging that was. But your faculty, just like our faculty here at the University of Southern California, had no choice but to step up to the plate and really adjust our classroom environments to continue to facilitate teaching and learning. So thank you for that. Let me also thank all of the staff members, custodial workers, food service workers, groundskeepers, administrative assistants, people who process payments, people who work in IT and technology, folks who lead academic departments, people who lead student affairs and student services units, certainly people in the senior administration at each of your 5 colleges. You all had to work so hard to make the colleges work and continue to be functional throughout this pandemic. It is not lost on me all of the work that each of you, as well as the colleagues that I didn't have an opportunity here to just name, just know for all of the faculty and staff members that we salute you for all of the work that you've done throughout the pandemic. Let me do one more thing here before I jump in. Let me express my sincerest condolences to any of you who have lost someone that you know and love to COVID-19. You are certainly in my thoughts at this time. After this, anything. You know, before the pandemic, none of us could have imagined the technological possibilities that existed or that were being developed to reimagine new ways of teaching and learning and interacting and running colleges across the country. So far, there have been more than 27,000 people who have joined me here in my living room over these past 2 months for virtual professional learning experiences and for facilitated conversations on race. So really, the technology has helped us understand that just about anything is possible here in 2020 and beyond, here in the midst of this pandemic, and certainly as we begin to imagine a post-pandemic America and a post-pandemic world, so much is possible. Among the possibilities after this, racial equity is possible. I want to talk specifically during our time here, during your 2020 convocation, about racial equity during this pandemic and beyond. Certainly, the pandemic has unmasked some tremendous and pervasive racial inequities that were longstanding in communities all across the country, including in our community colleges and our 4-year universities. We have also seen the coronavirus itself produce tremendous racial inequities between groups who have been infected and ultimately people who've passed away, right? There have been tremendous inequities between racial and ethnic groups. We've seen inequities in digital access. Who has access to high-speed internet and Wi-Fi? The pandemic, again, has laid bare that the digital divide that we were talking about in the early 2000s never went away, that it continues to be a thing that compromises teaching, learning, and access for students in K-12 schools and community colleges and universities across the country along socioeconomic lines and certainly among racial lines. But I am convinced now, given all that we have done to make colleges work across the country during this pandemic, I am convinced that after this, we can, in fact, achieve racial equity. You know, before the pandemic, there were tremendous racial inequities. Afterwards, racial equity should be our goal. It should be the thing that we pursue with the same degree of strategy, intentionality, hard work, and relentlessness that we pursued reopening our colleges, even in a virtual format, for this fall term. The same relentlessness with which we pursued continuing in an uninterrupted fashion, teaching and learning this past spring when there was a sudden onset of a global pandemic. Before the pandemic, we used to blame students, particularly students of color, for their underachievement. That, oh, they're underachieving because the high schools from which they came underprepared them for the rigors of college level work. Or, oh, they're underachieving because they're just not as ambitious as we need them to be. Or they're just not putting forth as much effort in the classroom. Or they're so disengaged in educationally meaningful and purposeful activities outside the classroom. I'm hoping that after this pandemic, after this, that we can begin to take institutional responsibility and stop blaming students for their underachievement and start asking ourselves questions about practices and policies and conditions and structures and systems that we've long maintained that cyclically reproduce underachievement among particular student groups, most especially students of color, and stop blaming the students. After this, we have an opportunity to take more seriously our roles as administrators, as staff members, and as faculty members to bolster and improve and sustain student success across your 5 colleges. You know, before the pandemic, we were so fascinated with deficits. All of our attention was placed on trying to understand why Black students, for example, were chronically underperforming without also relentlessly pursuing insights into Black students who were succeeding and attempting to understand what were, in fact, the policies, structures, institutional mindsets, conditions, curricular practices, leadership practices, and so on that led to the success of Black students. And what could we learn from those things that we might scale and replicate? I'm suggesting to you across each of the Alamo colleges that after this, that you place a sizable portion of your institutional attention on learning from students of color who have succeeded and doing more of what helped them to succeed. Just a couple more. Before the pandemic, we used to talk broadly about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Equity is so on trend right now, all across the nation, certainly there in Texas. But after this, we cannot talk about equity in the abstract, equity in an imprecise way. This current movement calls for us to think about racial equity specifically. It has become clear to me over my now 2-decade-long career in higher education that it's much more comfortable to talk about socioeconomic status, to talk about low-income students. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't. I am not suggesting at all that we ought to abandon our commitment to our poorest students and students who are disadvantaged by wealth inequities in the country. What I am saying to you, though, is that we cannot continue to skirt the race question. We cannot continue to privilege socioeconomic equity and inequities over racial inequities because, frankly, given the way that wealth and race commingle here in the United States, it is Black and brown students and indigenous students and lower income Asian American and Pacific Islander students who are most cyclically disadvantaged by the intersection of racism and poverty. Before the pandemic, we would avoid, as a matter of fact, talking about race. After this, we have to make race salient. If we don't, we will continue to see an exacerbation of the racial inequities that disadvantage so many students and so many communities that we say we care about. We will continue to see racial inequities compound year after year We will continue to spin our wheels going nowhere fast as we attempt to close gaps between racial and ethnic groups on our college campuses. You know, this current movement requires for real reckoning and grappling with race and racism. What is this movement that I'm referring to? In addition to the coronavirus pandemic, you may have noticed that there was also a global uprising in response to systemic racism here in the United States and around the world. Notice that I called it a movement, not a moment, a movement, not a moment. But I want to make sure that we all have the same understanding of what this movement is about. The movement was, in fact, sparked by the tragic murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor back in June. When those two unarmed Black people were murdered, we saw people take to the streets here in the US and shortly thereafter around the globe. But to be sure, the movement isn't just about the killings of those two individual Black Americans. The movement is also about the police killings of Black people, unarmed Black people, without consequence over time. As we trace law enforcement all the way back to slavery, and the very institution of law enforcement was born of slave catching and killing unarmed Black people during slavery, a practice that has never discontinued. The current movement is about the long-standing, pervasive, not just 2020, not just 2019, not just here in the 21st century, but really centuries long killings of unarmed Black people at the hands of law enforcement. But the movement isn't just about policing. It is also about other manifestations of systemic racism, anti-Blackness, and white supremacy in all their forms. Certainly in the criminal justice system, but also in housing, in economics, wealth, and in the workforce. Certainly inequities in education, including at our nation's community colleges. What we're hearing people all across the globe say to us as they are marching for Black lives is that it is time out. We've had enough with the chronic inequities that continue to place Black people at the bottom of just about every statistical metric of progress, well-being, and performance, including academic performance in institutions of higher education. Lastly, the movement is in response to inaction. Inaction on long-standing racial inequities, racial problems, and racism all across the US. These are the four things that people are protesting right now all across this country. It isn't just about the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. I don't mean to minimize those at all. That is definitely not my intent, but I think it's important for each of us as we go into this new school year to understand the full picture of what it is that people are calling for after this. Let's talk about inaction on racism, racial inequities, and racial problems. One way that we engage in inaction is by avoiding talking about race altogether. You see, in higher education, like other industries, we actively avoid confronting racial realities. We avoid naming racism, and we avoid, as we attempt in our diversity, equity, and inclusion committees, to make sense of data that very clearly show us that there is a problem between racial and ethnic groups, and that problem is laid bare in the data, we talk around the problem and avoid talking specifically about anything pertaining to race as we attempt to make sense of those data. So one typical approach in higher education is that we avoid talking about race. Another, someone says or does something racist or something racially offensive, we might go to, another coworker and say, hey, did you notice that this person said or did the thing? Or we may even go and talk with small groups about a thing that a colleague or a student may have done that seemed racially out of bounds. But very rarely do we engage the person, right? We denied that person an opportunity to actually have their consciousness raised about what was likely a racial mistake that they may have made. We also denied the institution an opportunity to hold itself accountable for ensuring that we don't have a racist on our faculty who microaggresses and stereotypes students and harms students of color in other ways because of the code of silence around race, right? Because we are just so unwilling to confront people in a productive way about how to, address these issues and problems on our campuses. We also tend to only talk about race on a college campus when there has been a significant racial crisis on campus, a crisis that has made local news, regional news, sometimes national news, and we have no choice but to engage in a campus-wide conversation. But even in those moments, the institutional aim is almost always to make this go away as quickly as possible so that we could return to normalcy, we could return to business as usual. I am going to suggest to you that after this, after what we have seen this summer all across the country, these protests for Black lives, these protests against systemic racism, I'm going to suggest to you that after this, we should not return to normal. Normal was inequitable. Rarely do we talk about race on our campuses in the aftermath of a significant racial crisis in our nation, or there in Texas, in San Antonio, or elsewhere, right? What I mean by this is the global uprisings that were sparked this summer occurred while most of us were away from campuses. Obviously, all of us are, working remotely. Many of us are working remotely. So we didn't have an opportunity to be there all together on campuses. But the truth is, following the murder of Trayvon Martin, we didn't bring people together on our campuses to learn from and engage in a productive conversation about his murder. After the death of Sandra Bland, we didn't seize that as an opportunity to talk about the intersectionality of race and gender for Black women and Black women's interactions with law enforcement officers. What I'm saying to you is that before this pandemic, we denied ourselves and our students the opportunities to learn about race and racism via national tragedies that were happening all around us that were disproportionately affecting Black and brown students. Let me say one more. When there were those horrific ICE raids and there were the separation of families and the placing of immigrant children in cages, on our campuses, we denied our students an opportunity to engage in productive sense-making and conversations about how that was racist and xenophobic, right? That's what we typically do. We typically avoid these things. And lastly, conversations about race are almost always expected to be led by Black faculty and staff. There's an expectation, my research tells me, with Black faculty and staff, that if there's something racial or there's some racial problem, you're going to be the one to step up and help us through this difficult moment or guide us through, right? We typically place the burden on our Black faculty and staff colleagues to address these issues. So in our remaining time, I want to spend the rest of the time here talking about avoidance. And then I'm going to end with some strategies that you can employ to make race salient, to get us beyond our patterns of avoidance. Why do we avoid talking about race and racism on our college campuses, despite the racial inequities that we see in our student data, despite the racial problems that are all around us? Why do we avoid it? It's because avoidance is cultural on most campuses. Most institutions have a cultural code of silence around talking about anything pertaining to race. I've not yet met a college president, provost, dean, chancellor, or any other leader who's explicitly said to students, faculty, and staff that we cannot talk about race here. I don't want to hear it. But instead, there are these cultural cues for students, faculty, and staff. As they see racial problems, racial tensions, racial inequities all around them, but nobody is talking about them, it suggests quite powerfully, as a matter of fact, to new students and to new employees that that's not a thing that we do here. We don't go there, but instead we skirt the issue. We avoid it. Second, most college and university faculty members and administrators tell me in my research with them that frankly, they don't have very much personal or professional experience talking about these issues, that they haven't gone through trainings and workshops and professional learning experiences that have taught them how to talk fluently, knowledgeably, and comfortably about racial topics. White professionals, faculty and staff members alike, tell us that I don't talk about race because I don't want to make a mistake and make people uncomfortable or say the wrong thing and offend someone. I don't want to be seen as naive on racial topics, and I definitely don't want to be seen as racist. So therefore, I just don't touch it. Faculty and staff of color tell us in our research here at the USC Race and Equity Center, we do research at colleges and universities all across the country. We hear from professionals of color that they don't feel safe raising these issues at their colleges, that they definitely don't want to be perceived as the angry Latina or the angry Black man who's always making white people uncomfortable by raising the race question. So therefore they don't. Sometimes, oftentimes in fact, professionals of color tell us that, I have put myself out there time and time again, trying to get my college to do the right thing, to live up to the values that it espouses in our mission statement, in our brochures, on our website, and so on. I've tried time and time and time again to get them to hire more faculty of color, to promote more people of color to senior leadership roles, and they haven't done it. So therefore, I've gotten tired. I've gotten tired of having to be the one time and time again, and there's no action rather. There's language for this. It's called racial battle fatigue. It's the literal exhaustion that ensues for professionals of color who have to keep pounding the pavement to try to get their colleges to do the right thing as it pertains to race and racial equity. Lastly, people across all racial and ethnic groups, professionals of color as well as white professionals alike, tell us that, frankly, they avoid talking about race because they're just afraid that these conversations are going to be explosive and divisive, that it's seemingly a powder keg, and that they don't want to disrupt the harmony. The challenge is the harmony, both before the pandemic and now, is an inequitable harmony. Somebody in the choir is off, right? There is no harmony when we look at our data, and our data continue to show us inequities between and among students from different racial and ethnic groups, and also between employees and among employees across racial and ethnic groups. That's not harmony, that's racial inequity. We suggest here at the USC Race and Equity Center, in fact, it's not a suggestion, we insist that we cannot achieve racial equity if we cannot talk about race and racism. So how do you do that? Here are just a few activities and strategies that we've employed with tremendous success over the lifespan of the center. The center is just about a decade old. I've been doing this work in higher education for now 22 years. And, I'm going to close out here with a set of activities and things that have, repeatedly yielded tremendous success on making conversations about race productive. I understand that it's scary. I understand that it is culturally abnormal. Even in a state like Texas, with this racial history, I understand that there's historical baggage, historical trauma that makes talking about race really scary. So here are some things that you can try to make your conversations about race and racial equity productive after this, right? You might ask every employee to write a 1 to 2 page personal racial history. You could do this in your academic departments, in your academic schools, in your administrative unit, with your staff members and your student affairs division. So ask each one of your colleagues in your unit to write a 1 to 2 page racial history, giving them some prompts. Here are just a handful of what some of those prompts might be. How was race treated and talked about in your family when you were growing up? What did your family members tell you about the racial other? People from groups, racial groups that are different from your own. How diverse were your neighborhood in schools, the schools that you attended when you were growing up? If yours was a religious family, how diverse was the synagogue, mosque, or church, or other place of religious worship where your family worshiped? What did you learn about race in your K-12 schooling experiences? For those of you who went to college, what did you learn in college about race? What did you learn about Black men from watching the local news? What do you continue to learn about Black men as an adult as you watch the ways in which Black men are represented and portrayed in local news? When and how did you unlearn racism? Understanding that the implicit bias science makes very clear to us that each of us has implicit biases, including me. Mr. Race and Equity Center founder and executive director himself has implicit bias. We all have it. It is inescapable. But the question here is, where and how did you unlearn those biases, right? Those are questions that most professionals have never grappled with, have never actually taken a moment to reflect on. So in this particular exercise, if you invite your colleagues to spend a page or two reflecting on these and other questions, and then, when you get together for your retreat or your next staff meeting or division meeting or department meeting, you spend an hour first having people talk in pairs, one colleague with another, give them 15 minutes to say, each of you take 7.5 minutes and talk about what you discovered about yourself as you wrote your personal racial history, and then open it up after those 15 minutes for a larger discussion. As you all talked in your pairs, what did you discover about yourselves? You will hear people say, I can guarantee you that I've never asked myself these questions. And there's some things that, I had suppressed. There were things, I had a racist father who, told us these awful things, and I just suppressed it or repressed it. And this conversation helped me realize that I may be bringing some of that to work with me to the Alamo colleges. All right, another is to facilitate opportunities for reflections on firsthand encounters with racism outside of campus. I mentioned to you all that there have been more than 27,000 professionals across a multitude of industries here in my living room over these past 2 months. We've been facilitating these company-wide and campus-wide and district-wide conversations on racism and people's interactions with the police, so on and so forth. As you can imagine, colleagues have shared heartbreaking, horrifying stories of their examples and encounters with the police, examples of their interactions with structural and systemic racism outside of work that have nothing to do with policing, but about other things. And it has helped their colleagues to understand that, wait, this isn't just about what we're hearing on the news or just about what we've seen come out of Minneapolis. You mean to tell me that some version of this has happened to somebody that I know? Somebody on my faculty? Somebody on my staff whose office is right next to mine? That person and their family have gone through these experiences. I would have never known. It makes colleagues much more empathetic, much more outraged, as a matter of fact, to stand up against racial justice, to stand alongside and in support and in solidarity with their colleagues who have had these kinds of experiences. Because race is so difficult to talk about, there's an exercise that I employ on campuses across the country where I invite seemingly taboo questions about race. So in a pre-pandemic version of this, I go to a campus, walk into a room of faculty members or staff members, sometimes a combination thereof, give everybody a blank note card with 3 instructions. Write legibly, don't put your name anywhere on the card, and I want you to write one question that you've long had about something pertaining to race or some sort of racial dynamic or some sort of racial tension, something pertaining to race here on this campus, a question that you've long had that you just haven't had the confidence or the comfort to ask out loud. Write that question on the note card. People take a minute, write it, I collect them, shuffle them. Hardly ever, really, almost never do I get a blank note card back, which means that really everybody in the room has been walking around with all of these questions about something pertaining to race at the college, sometimes for years and years, that they just haven't asked out loud, right? So I shuffle the cards and I pick 6 volunteers. They pull a card and they read the question that's on the card. And we began to engage in a conversation about that question, one after the other, right? What's good about this particular exercise is that the person reading it, odds are that they were not the author of the question. So therefore they have no ownership in the question that's being asked. The other thing that works well about it is that people understand that these were not questions that were tweeted to us by some external audience. These are questions that came from people in this room, from our colleagues. The third thing that works really well about this is that it helps people realize that these questions that we've been avoiding because we've been scared that they're going to be so divisive, that actually they're not all that divisive at all. These questions that we were scared to death to ask out loud, actually we're talking very productively through these questions right now. This is surprisingly going well. Listen, there's a digital way to do this exercise during the pandemic. You can, in the interest of time, I'll just tell you that you can go, there's a Google form that I've created that's at bit.ly/race question. And it's just an anonymous form that you have my full permission to plagiarize and recreate. You can have it. Go create it. It's anonymous. And it's a way to crowdsource anonymous questions from your colleagues there at the Alamo colleges across your 5 campuses around seemingly taboo questions. An adaptation of that same exercise is around inviting examples of people's encounters with racism on campus. Notice that I talked earlier about facilitating these forums where people talk about, encounters with police and encounters with systemic and structural racism outside of work or outside of school. Here, you're inviting your colleagues to engage in examples of racism on campus. I recognize that that's very hard for people to do in a town hall setting because of the power asymmetries that exist on most of our campuses. So what you might do here is an adaptation of the exercise that I just told you about, the taboo questions. I go into a room, give everybody a note card, 3 instructions: write legibly, don't write your name anywhere on the card. I want you to write succinctly. You have no choice but to write succinctly. It's a 3x5 note card, so you can't, that's all the space you have. Write succinctly about a time that you either experienced racism firsthand here on this campus, or you observed something racist happening on the campus. It didn't happen to you individually, but you at least observed it. Or third, you heard about a racist situation happening here on this campus. So you either experienced it firsthand, observed it, or you heard about it. Write succinctly. Give people 5 minutes or so, 10 minutes, collect the note cards. Sometimes I get blank note cards back, or a few back that I don't have any examples, but I get way too many note cards back with examples. So shuffle them, redistribute them, same thing. People read them out loud and we make sense of, what is exactly racist about this situation, to ensure that we're all arriving at the same understanding and analyzing the situation in the same way. How could this situation have occurred on our campus? What can we learn from this racial mistake? And most importantly, how can we ensure that this kind of situation never again happens here? Again, in this virtual environment, recognizing that people are continuing to work remotely there across your colleges, there's a way to do this digitally. There's a Google form that I've created for this one, bit.ly/thatwasracist. You have my full permission to recreate, plagiarize, whatever you want to do. You could use it to, again, crowdsource in an anonymous fashion, these examples of people's encounters with racism on your campuses, not the places where they used to work or some other campus, but in your district on your campuses. Just 2 more. Before the pandemic, I would use Poll Everywhere. So I'd go into a place and put up these polls and invite colleagues, pull out your tablet, your laptop, or your cell phone. Here are some poll questions that you can answer anonymously. We see the polls like on the big screens behind me, real life, real time polling. I'll give you an example here. You could use polling in Zoom. By the way, Zoom has a polling function. So as you can see here, we did a thing a couple weeks ago with a couple thousand college administrators and faculty members. And the question was, I've blanked out the name of the college here, but blank college has serious racial problems. As you can see here, only 12% of the faculty and staff at this particular college in this particular district, only 12% either disagreed or strongly disagreed that there were serious problems with racism. 15% said they didn't know. 3 out of 4 faculty and staff members at this particular college believe that their campus had a serious problem with race. So I would display these results and then we talk about them. We use the results to stimulate, a really productive conversation, particularly among the 75% who either agreed or strongly agreed. They will offer illustrative examples that would confirm that, yeah, there really are some problems here. Leads to a very productive conversation. Vignettes can lead to a also productive conversation. For example, notice that this is just 2 sentences. You could put up these 2 sentences in a staff meeting or in a faculty meeting. Native American, Asian American, Pacific Islander, and multiracial students and employees feel alienated because all conversations about race default to the black-white binary. How can we address this with deep levels of intentionality? This is a thing that happens on most campuses. I should have also put in Hispanic and Latinx students here, by the way. But most conversations about race default to a black-white binary. So you could use a vignette like this. It's just 2 sentences to stimulate a really productive conversation about how can we ensure that we include with high degrees of intentionality Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, Native American, Asian American, Pacific Islander, and multiracial students in our future and ongoing conversations about race here on the campus. What shouldn't we do? Should also be a part of your conversation. Here is where we often hear colleagues say, well, we shouldn't stop talking about anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism and the ways in which Black people are chronically marginalized and on the losing end of racial inequities. But instead, we should multitask. We should be sure that while we are lifting up the experiences of these other often forgotten about groups, that we don't do so at the expense of Black Americans, Black students, Black staff, and faculty members. And then again, how can a situation like this be proactively addressed? How can we, even if this is not a problem right now on our campus, how can we ensure with some proactivity, with some preventative measure, that this doesn't happen here? Lastly, I'm a huge proponent of campus racial climate assessments. I would be. I have been doing campus racial climate assessments over the entirety of my career. We have launched here at the USC Race and Equity Center what we call the National Assessment of Collegiate Campus Climates. It is a quantitative survey that so far has been administered to more than 500,000, more than 500,000 college students at community colleges and four-year institutions across the country. This fall, that survey is being administered to more than 1.2 million students at community colleges across the country. I'm a huge proponent of formally assessing the campus racial climate and then using the results of those climate assessments to both inform and sustain subsequent conversations about race on campus. What I'm suggesting to you is that the data could be your entree into the conversations that you have been avoiding, the conversations that have been seemingly, too difficult to approach. The data gives you permission to approach these things as they show you, again, inequities between and among student groups. I'm going to stop here and just say to you that I absolutely believe with all my heart that after this pandemic, racial equity is absolutely possible. It is achievable, but it cannot be achieved if we continue to avoid talking about race and racism on our college campuses. You have my best wishes for a really productive start to this unusual school year, but my best wishes for a productive start nonetheless. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harper. What an amazing engagement that we're having with you after this after this racial equity. Thank you for framing that for us and giving us these tools. Now we'd like to go into a Q&A session. We already have several questions from my colleagues really around the work that we can do within our organization, really feeding on a lot of the tools that you provided for us. And so we'll jump right into that. One of the questions we have from Charles is, what strategies do you suggest for having authentic conversations about race when we face a few problems that would undermine authenticity? So one of those speech may be clumsy or insensitive and opening deeper wounds, or maybe addressing racism. It also includes cancel culture and some of those other sort of ideals that may make this a difficult conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. I really appreciate this question. It's an important one. I think when we are entering into these conversations with our staff colleagues or with our faculty colleagues, that we have to all agree that this is going to be a brave space where we invite bravery. We invite people to bravely and courageously step up and put themselves out there. But it's also going to be a space where there is tremendous forgiveness for mistake making, right? There's some acknowledgement that, look, we all acknowledge that for some of us, this will be our first time talking about this. So it may be clumsy. Things may not come out the way that we expected them to. So let's agree that we are not going to judge each other that we're not going to, I really appreciated this language around cancel. Let me just make sure that everybody knows what that means. Cancel culture is, somebody makes a mistake and they're completely canceled. We don't want to hear any more from them. We don't want to interact with them anymore. We're done with them. We discard them. Like, we have to agree as professionals that we're not going to do that. That this is, in fact, an institution of higher education. This is a space for learning. Not just a space for our students to learn, but a space for us to learn too, with and from each other. And sometimes that learning, we have to allow people to make mistakes. Now, one last thing that I'll say about this, there's language called critical friends, right? That we're going to show up as critical friends, not to criticize anything or everything that someone says, but instead to show up with a friendly posture, with a collegial posture. I'm your friend and colleague, right? If you say something that's not quite right, I am going to raise your critical consciousness that you've done it and help you understand, why it isn't right or why it might sound a little racist. But I'm not seeking to embarrass you when I do that. I'm seeking to help you grow and develop as a colleague and as a friend.
Another question that's come in, and you touched on this in your PowerPoint when you were talking about often there are forgotten folks, specifically we talk about Black and white issues. I think here in San Antonio, there's a little bit of a different dynamic, and especially within an organization of majority Hispanic serving institutions. And so the question really is, how do we begin to address, recognize, and change the climate for the minority within the minority who are often overlooked within our Hispanic serving institutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate that. We have many HSIs here in California that our center works with. So I understand this question really well. I would say, right, that, and I'm going to use the language that the person used here, understanding the experiences of the minority within the minority requires understanding the experiences first, right? Like, those campus racial climate surveys can really give us some serious insight into which groups are feeling the weakest sense of belonging, feeling on the margins, feeling unimportant, and those data can help us, right, determine, okay, here's where we need to target an institutional strategy to increase belongingness and inclusion and so on among, those particular student groups or faculty and staff groups. So I'm going to suggest that the data can give you permission and license to, really target those groups. One other thing that I'm going to say here, and I don't mean to make things uncomfortable, but I'm really glad that this question was raised. I don't know what the dynamics are there in San Antonio, but I can tell you that here throughout the state of California at our community colleges, there are tremendous Black-brown tensions among employees, particularly among classified staff and staff in the, lowest compensated roles and the least powerful roles at the colleges. There tends to be a lot of tension and infighting, oftentimes around hiring and employment processes that don't get talked about, those Black-brown tensions. Again, I may not be walking down your street, but it just seemed to me that I ought to mention to you that that's a thing that happens here in California at our community colleges, those Black-brown tensions that don't get talked about. We got to deal with that too.
So historically, when there's a crisis, there typically is some social change, or at least the attempt at social change. How do we, in this day, in this moment that we're in, how do we continue the momentum of that so that this doesn't become a one-time thing where we are all rallying around the issue, but then it slowly fades away?
Yeah, love it. Strategy. Strategy is what we need right now, not random programs, one-time activities, one-time town halls. Wow, that was such a great town hall conversation. Great. Then nothing else happens, right? We have to put into our strategy ways to sustain a commitment to racial equity specifically. This is a punctuation of an earlier point from my presentation, that we got to stop talking about equity in the abstract. It's no longer good. I mentioned that we're working with Achieving the Dream, and we're about to begin a partnership with Aspen Institute, and they're all in with us that we have to talk about racial equity specifically moving forward, not just equity in the abstract. So, as we begin to develop our equity plans for this school year, next school year, our 5-year equity plans, those plans ought not be done in a raceless way, right? Our research here at the center, sometimes we study equity plans, right? We'll go and watch the equity committee. We'll sit in the corner and observe their work. Very well-meaning, very smart faculty and staff colleagues will spend 2 hours a month, 9 months in an academic school year, so 18 whole hours, the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee meets. It might surprise you that never once do they talk about race. Never once do they say anything about anything racial. They talk about equity in the abstract. So it then ought not surprise you that this 50-page report that these very smart colleagues have worked on, when you go to the PDF and you type in the search window, race, racism, racial, none of those words are there. Even when you type the words Hispanic, Latinx, Latino, Black, African American, Native American, Asian American, so on and so forth, that the only places where those terms appear are in the data tables that show us that there are gaps between groups, but not in the narrative of the report. And most alarmingly, not in the recommendations. The recommendations are broad and abstract, they're for everybody, but the data table on page 7 shows us that it is Native American students who are most underserved on this particular metric. Yeah, we can't, if we're gonna sustain this movement, the documents that get produced from this movement and beyond have to be race salient. They can no longer be raceless.
I want to shift gears a little bit. I'm getting a lot of questions really around how we can help our students within this area. A lot of questions really surrounding what kind of learning outcomes can we embed within our curriculum, and also a question related to how can we shift from students being incarcerated, which we serve that population, to training. Also, what can we do as far as embedding topics about racism within our coursework, within the curriculum? Can you address a few of those really tools for our faculty as they are in the classroom?
Sure. To be honest, and I want to be both honest and respectful, we cannot teach our students things that we don't know ourselves. I am a professor here in 2 schools at USC, in the School of Business and the School of Education. If I attempted to go teach physics, it would be a disaster. I don't know anything about physics, right? So, I'm suggesting here that we have to commit ourselves to a professional learning journey. We need a professional curriculum for faculty and staff members in which we, very quickly, we don't have to take 100 years to do this, but where we very quickly upskill faculty and staff members on the practice of racial equity, on how to thoughtfully embed race and a multitude of racial and cultural histories into the curriculum, where we teach that stuff, not in a one-off like professional development session, but as a part of a professional learning curriculum. Here in California, we announced about 6 weeks ago the launch of what we're calling the California Community College Racial Equity Leadership Alliance. It is an alliance that brings together 72 community colleges across California. Once a month, we are providing here at the USC Race and Equity Center a different professional development experience on a different aspect of race and racial equity. And our goal really is to improve and deepen the racial literacy of people who work at community colleges across our state, and to like seriously upskill them. That is what I think is required before you go and try to, just like try this stuff out. I know we're almost at time. Let me just say here quickly that one mistake that I've seen at community colleges and universities across the country is where well-intended faculty members attempted to just like sprinkle like diversity or race into the curriculum through some readings, which seemed great, right? Like, okay, like, look, I did it. It's not just on week 7 where we talk about the diversity week or the people of color week. Look, it's all across. Like I sprinkled in the readings. The challenge is when the faculty members don't know how to teach that content. And, there are these moments of, like racial tension, and faculty members don't know how to make good, productive use of those racial tensions that arise in class conversations. So it's not just about decolonizing the curriculum and diversifying the curriculum. It's also about committing oneself to a professional learning series and set of experiences that allow you to know how to teach that curriculum with high skill.
Thank you for that. So one of the other questions I'm getting a number of times is about the idea of white fragility, and then the idea of whites and other groups as allies. Can you talk a little bit about that? Yeah,
sure. By the way, you are an excellent selector and synthesizer of questions. Seriously, I've loved your presentation of these questions.
Thank you. That I'm collecting the right questions from my colleagues. Please feel free to continue to use the Q&A, folks. I will do my best to get to your question.
I'm going to suggest that people read Robin DiAngelo's work on white fragility, and also understand that it is a real thing. Before the book, there was an article that Robin DiAngelo wrote by the same title, White Fragility. You can find the article. It's publicly available. Just a mere Google search should return it for you. There's a way that I use that article in every class that I teach here at USC. There's a week, usually around week 3 or 4, I go into my class. So it's on the syllabus. Students have had to read it for that week. I walk into the classroom and I ask everybody, raise your hand if you identify as white. All the white students raise their hands. I say to them, if your hand is raised, I want you to make a circle in the middle of the room. If your hand isn't raised, I want you to make a circle around the perimeter of the room. Everybody's like, wait, what's going on? And then all the white students, kind of nervously make their circle in the middle of the room. Once everybody's settled, I say to the white students, I want you to spend the next 30 minutes talking with each other about Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility article that was assigned to you this week. As you might imagine, there's predictably about 90 seconds of awkwardness and silence before someone eventually jumps in. But the moment that someone jumps in, it just goes. It becomes a really, really robust conversation with high engagement. And what ends up happening, we get to the 30 minutes and they're like, wait, could we have 5 more minutes? Could we have 10 more minutes? We want to keep going. Because for many of them, it's their first time ever in their whole lives talking about themselves as white people, talking about the things that Robin DiAngelo writes about in her article. By the way, Robin DiAngelo is a white woman herself, right? So, that particular activity that I do in my courses, it gives white students, oftentimes for the first time ever, permission to talk about race, right? I am going to suggest to you that some version of that you can do with your colleagues. You may not want to walk into a room and be like, all the white people raise your hand, but you might instead just say, we're all going to read this as a staff in our unit or as a faculty in our department. We're all going to read it. But we are going to start the conversation with our white colleagues, taking the first 15, 20, whatever number of minutes, talking with each other about, the implications of what D'Angelo has written for them as individuals and for our department or our unit or our college writ large.
So you talked about training, and then you talked about how we can really start a dialogue within the classroom or even within our work groups. But there are a couple of questions coming in about just how do you engage with students of color? So people want to go just to the basics in everyday class. Maybe we're not having a race discussion, or maybe I haven't yet had an opportunity to go to a training or do some in-depth study. How do we interact with our students to ensure that we are being equitable and that we are being anti-racist?
Sure. So being anti-racist demands that one develops racial literacy. Racial literacy is the ability and the skillfulness with which one reads racial situations, the way in which one enters and comfortably and with high skill engages in conversations about race, right? It's about having a fluency even around racial topics. Racial literacy demands actual literacy. It demands reading things about race and racism and students of color and employees of color. There is a whole literature on this stuff. As Dr. Brownlee mentioned in his introduction, I am a past president of the Association for the Study of Higher Education. There's a whole association of people who study these very things. I have 12 books about higher education. All of them are about this very question that's being asked. Sam Macias, who's this brilliant scholar at University of California, San Diego, Sam has a book on how to effectively include Asian and Asian American students, right? Like, what I'm suggesting to you is that you got to read this stuff. There are literal manuals. My colleague here at USC, Estela Mata Ben-Simon, Dr. Ben-Simon has a book, Engaging the Race Question. She has another new book that just came out this summer, From Equity Talk to Equity Walk, that literally is like sort of a step-by-step guide. Here's how you do this stuff. Yeah, I'm going to suggest to you that we ought to read things individually. We also ought to read them in our work groups, in our academic departments. We ought to all read the same thing and talk about its implication for our work that we do. There are these practical books and articles and other things out there that are really good.
Okay, so this is a question that I think a lot of people have, and it's one of the things that you talked about with avoidance of discussion and being uncomfortable with approaching racial issues, or even just having conversations in general. Some people may even avoid specific racial groups, but the question is, how do you come back from a mistake? What do you do if you have offended someone, if you've unintentionally been racist, if you have now educated yourself and discovered some of the mistakes you made? How do you come back from that?
Sincerely apologize. That's it. Just sincerely apologize. And do so without, this is not my term, it's somebody else is the architect of this term, without white-splaining. If you are a white person who makes the mistake, or without doing some version of, it's like some version of mansplaining, right? Like when a man does or says something sexist, and a woman brings to his attention that, hey, what you did was sexist, and he tries to explain to her why what he did wasn't intentionally sexist, why blah, 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 blah. And that's what she hears, blah, 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 blah. Because what she's saying to you is that what you did landed on me in a sexist way. And as a woman, here is how I experienced what you just said or did. So I don't need you to explain to me why, from your point of view, it wasn't. You're not a woman, so therefore you wouldn't know how women experiences. The same kind of thing happens in conversations about race. When somebody makes a racial mistake, they just want to explain blah, 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 all the reasons why it isn't racist. But I'm telling you as a Black person that it sounded racist to me, and that I experienced it as racially out of bounds, as racially offensive. You wouldn't be offended. You're white. I'm telling you as a Black person that it was offensive to me. So yeah, just don't undermine your apology with the but what a blah 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 blah. Like no. Just say look, I sincerely apologize. I'm going to commit myself to continuing to learn more, so that I don't make future mistakes like this. But then also very sincerely invite additional feedback. Like I invite you to continue to raise my consciousness about when I inadvertently say or do something that may be offensive or flat out racist.
So there are a couple questions now that are coming in really about more systemic things within our organization. So how do we approach social change in higher education when there are, and I'm going to quote the person, capitalistic power dynamics. So their examples include budget-driven institutions that impact departments, income dependency among staff and faculty or students, financial inequities. So where do we start with that?
Yeah, I think this is where we have to take an intersectional approach, right? Like we have to, as we're making sense of, capitalist structures and institutional behaviors, we have to also intersect that with race and racial inequities, and concern ourselves with trying to understand how these particular things exacerbate racial inequity, exacerbate inequities between and among employees across different racial and ethnic groups, students across different racial and ethnic groups. We tend to do those two analyses in isolation. Like the diversity committee is over here thinking about the diversity stuff and the race stuff. Then you got this other committee over here thinking about these sort of larger cultural, economic forces, capitalism, and so on. But the truth is, the two are very much mutually informing. Yeah, that would be my suggestion.
And just finally, I know we want to begin to wrap up, but can you talk to us a little bit about, there are questions coming in about tokenism, about people of color being sort of forced to be in the role of solving the problem. But also there are folks who are non-minorities who are saying, I feel uncomfortable or I don't feel like I'm allowed in this space. So can we talk about how we should work together equitably and responsibly in order to move this agenda forward?
Sure. This is a wonderful last question. It's a great way to end. One of the most beautiful things for me this summer, as I watched the televised coverage of the marches and protests across our nation and around the globe, those protests were beautifully intergenerational and they were beautifully interracial. It wasn't just Black people marching for Black lives. It wasn't just Black and brown people marching for Black lives. It was really an interracial coalition. There were tons of white people out there. I am going to suggest that in the same ways that those white folks showed up with their Black Lives Matter signs to march in a protest, you got to show up at your college in that same way. Maybe not literally. You don't have to necessarily walk around with a Black Lives Matter poster. That might make some people uncomfortable in Texas. But what you might do, though, instead is through your everyday actions, consistently confirm that Black Lives Matter. Not just say it, but consistently confirm it. When we are at the table making determinations about hiring decisions, it shouldn't be just the Black people that show up advocating for the hiring of more Black people. White folk got to show up too, right? When we're talking about diversifying the curriculum, there has to be white voices in there too that are advocating and insisting that we got to pay more attention to decolonizing the curriculum and ensuring with high degrees of intentionality that, you know, there's meaningful representation across a range of racial histories, cultural identities, racial identities, and so on. Yeah, I think what I'm saying here in response to this last question is that we need both and. We need people of color to continue to feel empowered to bring agency to our campuses as we attempt to help our campuses enact their espoused values around equity, diversity, and inclusion. What I'm also saying, though, is that we need white folks to step up. In many cases, white people have nothing to lose, especially given, right, the racial stratification of the higher education workforce, that when we look at those who are at the power epicenter, those who have the most power on campuses, they tend to be white. And I understand that you have one historically Black university in the district, or college rather, one historically Black college in the district. I want to acknowledge that, right? I'm a huge proponent of HBCUs. I went to an HBCU, proud alum. But what I am saying though, right, is that on most campuses, the faculty tends to be more white than the student body, especially at HSIs. Faculty and academic senates tend to be largely led by whites. Department chairs, academic deans, and so on. What I'm saying here is that, yeah, we need white people with power to also come to the table in defense of Black lives and in defense of other racial and ethnic groups that are chronically underserved on our college campuses. You all have been really terrific. Again, I've really appreciated this opportunity to address you at your convocation. And let me just say one more time that you have my best wishes for an amazing start to your now virtual new school year.
Dr. Harper, I know I said I wouldn't ask any more questions, but I do have one more. I think this will be an easy one for you. Folks are asking how they can get your books and how they can get your resources and connect with you and the tools that you use. I'm sure you have a website or some resource where we can tap into the things that you've talked about.
Sure. Okay. That was an easy one. All right. So all of my books are on Amazon, every single one of them. If you go to race.usc, C as in Charlie, .edu, race.usc.edu. That's our center's website. If you navigate your way to the research and publications page on the website, which should be easy, you know, we have a ton of free downloadable PDFs. You don't have to sign up for nothing. You don't have to put your email address in. It's just there, free. Let me also mention that, and I know this is great. I'm glad this came up. The district has had a partnership with the Center for Urban Education here at USC that was founded and led by my colleague and friend Estella Ben-Simone. Professor Ben-Simone is retiring from USC in December 2020. Therefore, she has quite generously gifted me her center. The Center for Urban Education merged with our center on July 1st. I think this week actually is where we're going live with all of the resources and tools that the Center for Urban Education developed over its 20-year lifespan. All of that stuff is going to be aggregated and housed in an open access form on the USC Race and Equity Center website. You won't see that if you go there today, but if you come back a week from now, you'll see a treasure chest of all of these resources from the Center for Urban Education, as well as our resources from the Race and Equity Center.
Dr. Harper, after this keynote, anything. But before we end, I would like to bring Dr. Flores back if he has any closing words to share with you or with our attendees today. Dr. Flores.
All right, good morning. I just want to thank Dr. Harper. Thank you very much. I think it's very important in your comments and the discussion. You can see we have a lot of interest from faculty and staff. And so we want to continue the conversation. I want to thank you, Dr. Harper, for what you have articulated, because we do need to move from inaction to action on issues regarding racism. And most importantly, they're not individual actions, they're systemic. And they are embedded over years, decades, and even centuries within our system. And I think it's, we have an intentional focus, as you mentioned, in how we can move forward, specifically to address issues of racial equity within our community and ensure that we honor lived experience and we reflect on and move forward regarding issues of inequity within our community and within larger society. So I just want to thank you, Dr. Harper. I want to thank our colleagues, and there's a high level of interest for everything, and we know we're going to continue. Many folks will continue the conversation with Dr. Harper shortly after convocation with regard to our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council district-wide to be able to support organic efforts at all of the colleges and be able to move forward to action. Thank you, Dr. Harper. Thank you, colleagues.
And now I'd like to shift gears a little to another way that you can empower our diverse students for success. So I'm going to invite Dr. Veronica Garcia to talk about our Employee Giving Back campaign. Dr. Garcia.
Mute. Can you hear me now? There we go. Thank you, Christy. Yes, we're back. We are now launching our Employee Giving campaign. And there are 5 ways that you can give. One is through the Alamo Foundation, of course. We have our Alamo Promise, our student scholarships, our college advocacy centers, and of course, the United Way has tons of opportunities where you can give. And then finally, the arts and the Bear County. If you can go to the next slide, please. There we go. So we know that this is extraordinary times, which calls for extraordinary measures. We're in the middle of a pandemic that has impacted so many lives. And I'm sure you know someone who's lost their job or has been furloughed. And unfortunately, this has hit one of our most vulnerable populations, you know, our children, our seniors. And with your payroll contribution, you can impact a child's life through a $5 payroll deduction can feed a hungry child. Or through a $10 payroll deduction, you can provide several meals for our seniors. Many of our seniors can't get to the grocery store right now. They are depending on Meals on Wheels and other organizations to bring food to them. So we really need your help. If you could go to slide 3, please. Another way that you can contribute is through donations of scholarships. We have so many students that just need that one course to complete their enrollment schedule. So you can give a $21 a donation or a $15 a donation to a student who may cover their books or may cover that additional course that they need just to graduate. Next slide, please. It's kind of awkward. I want to really control this, but I can't. I have to depend on someone else. So as I mentioned earlier, payroll deduction is an easy way for you to contribute. And in the past, we have heard from you that it's, you know, kind of awkward. It's a little hard to find. Well, we made it really easy. And thanks to the wonderful IT folks that we have here at Alamo, they were able to create a channel for us. So if you go to the employee tab in your ACES, and right underneath, there's a channel that says Employee Giving Campaign. You can go through, very easily walk through the steps. I did that the other day. I already made my donation. It's very simple, and you can do that. Now, if payroll deduction doesn't work for you, we're happy to take that one-time donation. Last year, Alamo Colleges was identified as a majority giving organization, and we want to continue. So your one-time contribution does impact, and we need you. We need your help. We know that there's a lot of need out there right now. We're in the middle of this pandemic. So any gift that you can give would be greatly appreciated. And each of the colleges have amazing teams in the employee development group that are willing to help you, walk you through the process or answer your questions. And for more details, you can go to www.alamo.edu/employeesgive. And what's important to us is that you can help us in a small way or a large way, but anything that will make a difference in an employee or a student or one of our communities. So with that, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation with you just a little bit. It's been a privilege to be part of the employee giving campaign. And I'd like to shout out to all of those employees that are volunteering to help us with this program this year. So stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Aaron Prado, your new Faculty Senate President here at Northwest Vista College. On behalf of my fellow senators, I'd like to welcome you back for another year of student success and changing lives through quality instruction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a new semester. My name is Judah Leggett. I'm the Faculty Senate President for Northeast Lakeview College. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of our returning faculty and to our new faculty.
Greetings all. I'm Kelly Wilder, President of Faculty Senate at St. Philip's College. I'd like to send all of you a warm welcome to the 2020-2021 academic year. It's going to be a great one. To our returning faculty, I want to send my heartfelt thanks to you. The work you did this past year in these unprecedented times is truly remarkable.
My name is Olivia Sandoval. I'm President of the SAC Faculty Senate. On behalf of the Senate, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to the new faculty. Welcome to our SAC family. We're glad you're here.
Welcome back, PAC faculty. I hope you had a restful summer. I know that for many of you, the summer was anything but stress-free given the circumstances. As you recall, we were having a wonderful academic year, having won the Aspen Award. Then the pandemic struck.
I think we can all be proud of our incredible effort this past spring to keep teaching and move all instruction to the remote environment. It wasn't easy, but it was an incredible affirmation of our dedication to student success and an affirmation of our innovative spirit.
I loved watching everyone rise to these occasions and see people triumph in ways for our students that we have not had to do before. And I am internally grateful and so very much in admiration for you all.
I know that all of you are having to work extra hard right now to prepare for this upcoming semester. And I know that our work colleagues are quite different from normal semesters.
You, the faculty, have much to be proud of for how you persevered to help our students complete the semester. All of you were amazing. The entire community is grateful for your commitment and the dedication to your students.
I would also like to extend a warm welcome to the returning faculty, and I'd like to commend you on your outstanding achievement of quickly adapting to a remote environment.
We've got a big job ahead of us, and let's remember that we're stronger together. If you need help with your remote classes, ask for help, and in turn, let's be ready to help each other.
There are more challenges ahead of us, but if we pull together and work as we always do, as a community, we'll do well, and we'll do well by our students.
We are an outstanding team, and together we accomplish many accolades.
To everyone, please know your Faculty Senate is here to help you with all of your needs. We want to make your lives better here at the Alamo Colleges, and we're really excited to get started on this year. Please do reach out if there's anything we can do for you to support your needs here.
Please know that Faculty Senate is here to support you in anything that you need during this upcoming academic year. Welcome back.
Let's make sure that we keep our students in mind, show compassion and concern for them and their families since they may be going through difficult times.
Till we meet again, thank you so much again for all that you do, and I hope you have a wonderful year.
Best wishes for a wonderful and successful semester. The Faculty Senate is here to support you.
And on behalf of your Faculty Senate officers, Vicente Guillot, Amanda Salinas, Dan Rodriguez, and Matilda Stout, have a wonderful and safe academic year.
Let's check in with our colleagues and see if anyone is struggling. Let's trade tips and ideas and share with what we've learned, because while we may not be on campus, we're all in this together.
And now I'd like to bring forward our chair of chairs, Ms. Kathy Mayer, or is it Dr. Kathy Mayer?
This is Kathy Mayer, Christy. On behalf of the District Council of Chairs, welcome back. I know many of us have mixed emotions about the start of this new academic year. 2020 has been a year of unfathomable challenges, but we have helped one another with so many things, including technology, remote support, encouragement, humor, empathy, and compassion. We have learned that we are capable of things we never dreamed possible, and we have grown through the challenges we have encountered. We are bonded in a unique way through this experience, and we will continue to care for each other as we forge ahead. I encourage you to visit Family Helping Families on the ACD website if you want to help or if you need help. I especially want to take a moment to acknowledge all the chairs for their extraordinary work and for the tireless advocacy they have provided for faculty and students. I also want to extend heartfelt gratitude for the tremendous support from the Board of Trustees, the Chancellor, and the leadership at the district and college levels. Most importantly, a special thank you to each and every person who gives their all each day through their passion for their work. As we navigate through this upcoming year, remember that even on those days when you feel alone or lost, we are all walking forward together on this path. Together, as family, we will hold each other up and find our way through to a brighter future. In the meantime, keep shining your own unique light as you start this year's new journey. Mask up, stay safe, and all the best to each and every one of you.
Thank you, Kathy, for that. Thank you to everyone who participated in Convocation, each of our speakers. We had an amazing time with you to kick off this new year, but also want to let everyone know that it's not over. We also have breakout sessions through this afternoon, so you can take a look at them there. A session on Alamo Promise, one on return to campus if you have any questions about what that looks like and how that will feel. We'll also have one at 1:15 about providing equity through universal access. There's a session on quality and online learning design, a remote teaching refresher, and using the Alamo Experience platform. So please be sure to partake in those. There's Zoom links there, but you don't have to worry about those right now. You can go into Alamo Talent to sign up for them as well. So please partake in those. They're posted now. So don't let this be the end of your Convocation experience. Again, thank you all for being here, and we hope to see you in the breakout sessions. Also, don't forget that there are lots of questions about the resources and the websites, the slides. We will send that all to you later this afternoon, so you don't have to worry about that. You definitely will get a copy of it, and we hope to see you on campus sometime soon. If not, we'll see you at a Zoom session. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.